let's try to paint not just how AI is going to make things more efficient or a little bit better, but how it's going to transform and could potentially turn this industry, upside down or sideways.
There probably will be some really big losers, and there will probably be a lot of really big winners that look considerably different than the companies today or don't even exist yet today.
In the last 8 months, traffic from answer engines like ChatGPT has 10x'd. Like, we are seeing a significant logarithmic curve here for pet owners using AI to solve their problems.
There are additionally cases where a client has come in and said, I've already run this through ChatGPT. I've already got the blood work in there. I've already got everything in there. I just need you to prescribe the following. And the veterinarian has said no.
Welcome, everyone, back to another episode of the Veterinary AI Brief. We have a very special show here for you today. We are all about giving you the so what for veterinary medicine's key takeaways in AI developments. And just an incredible development has happened with us over the last couple months with a really special individual who certainly needs no introduction, but we're going to do it anyways. Adam, can you tell everyone a little more about Jon and why he's here?
Yeah, so as Robert mentioned, we have a special guest today, Jon Ayers, who was the lead author and spearhead of the recent companion animal report that we launched this past week, a 75-page look at the trends of where veterinary medicine and AI are today, but also what are the biggest areas for disruption. And we're going to be unpacking that on the pod this morning. A couple things about Jon. So Jon served as the IDEXX CEO for I believe 17 years up until 2019. But my relationship with Jon, I think, really begins at the first Veterinary Innovation Summit, where we were putting together the program and we wanted to bring a visionary leader in the animal health space that we thought was really open-minded and curious about these conversations. And honestly, when we reached out, we weren't sure that he was going to even be interested in, but he came and he spoke at that first Innovation Summit, crushed it, and came back and did another talk. And I think from then on, for me personally, has always been this incredible individual in terms of balancing where is the industry at today and how is it currently serving and meeting the needs of both pet owners and veterinarians, and where are we falling short, especially on certain species like feline medicine, which he's incredibly passionate about. But where can we go and what is that bigger, better course in the future? And so when we were able to reconnect as part of this paper, it was a real treat and joy to begin to explore that, now armed with all the new technologies and tools that have come since our first meeting close to it, I think a decade ago now. So Jon, welcome to the pod. Thank you for joining us today.
Adam, thanks. And just great to join you guys on this. Towards the end of last year, I completely freed up all my industry connections, became completely independent. And I really wanted to get back to the industry at that point. And with my intellect and any other way that I could, I was approached by Jane Brunt, who runs Catalyst Council. I've known her for 15 years, and she asked if I wanted to be on the board. And since I'm a cat guy, you can tell by my cats, I said, yeah, let's do that. And as we started to formulate what my role could be on Catalyst Council, we decided to establish the Market Insights Committee because we felt that we could bring a lot of market research to the industry and the profession about cats. So as we started to get into it, and we're trying to really understand what was going on with cat medicine, with cat visits. Of course, visits overall were declining. We asked the basic question like, okay, visits are declining. Are cats different than dogs? Apparently nobody had asked that question. And I don't know, it seemed like a pretty obvious question to me. We've done a lot of research on that. But that's that market research started to lead to the question of, well, what about AI for cats? And as we kind of got into it, Jane said, well, you ought to really listen to this, veterinary AI brief. And so I listened to the first one, listened to 3 of you guys. And, we were talking about how AI may help cats, and we felt actually could help cats a lot. But I listened to you guys and I said, holy smokes, this is like a big deal for the industry. I'm not sure everybody fully understands what you guys are talking about. This is, as I knew veterinary medicine, it's really got characteristics, and we listed 15 in the paper, that make it highly exposed, more exposed than even human medicine, to the impact of AI, call it evolution, transformation, disruption, whatever you want to use. So, I said, we got to talk about this. So, I asked you guys and Jane and another guy, David Kincaid, that is really involved with AI and writes a great blog on Substack. And I said, let's write a paper and let's talk about what's going on systematically. And then, as we got into it, we realized that it's not just about what's being done right now, and you guys were like coming up with some crazy stuff. And I was researching, and this is a big deal. I don't think anybody really understands the second and third order consequences. So let's try to paint not just how AI is going to make things more efficient or a little bit better, but how it's going to transform and could potentially turn this industry, upside down or sideways. So we started getting furiously involved, of course, using AI every step of the way, writing the paper. And it just the last 2 weeks, the ideas just were tumbling out. And finally, like we said, we gotta like set a deadline. I mean, we'll be doing this forever. We gotta publish the paper. So we set the deadline of September 22nd, which was 2 weeks ago. And we finished writing it before proofing on Saturday, the 2 days before, and then we proofed it on Sunday, and we launched it on Monday. And I will tell you, the reception has been really interesting. No one, and this is a reception from leaders in the large players, whether they be the corporates or the suppliers or the innovators or veterinarians, or no one is really actually taking issue with the 3 particular provocations that we laid out. And they said, no, that's not going to happen. No one said, no, that's not going to happen. They may say, well, the pace that it could happen is somewhere between, well, it's happening now, or no, that's not going to happen for another like 12 or 18 months, which is like nothing in the grand scheme of things. And so, and then, there was, everybody said, oh, we're in a really good place. We have a really good strategy. And, when we talk about it, we said, that can't all be true. Not everybody's got a good strategy. And I would say that, the purpose of the paper was as a public service to the industry to help them understand about how big this is. And I would say that people are still coming to grips with it. And they're still learning. And of course, not everything we said maybe come true exactly we're going to say it. We may have missed things entirely. There are whole sections we didn't talk about, whether it's, specialty or telemedicine or a lot of other things. But I think we have accomplished the goal, which is let's go beyond sort of the basics and think what the larger consequences for the industry, for the pets, and for the pet owners. And I'll just tell you, I think it's one of the most exciting times to be in business in my 45-year career.
Awesome. Thanks, John. Maybe one point just to open up and unpack a little bit. You mentioned that, and this has kind of been echoed in some of the feedback and comments I've received about it, that there is maybe a shared alignment of a lot of the vision, but folks might feel that they are more secure, their businesses are really well positioned. And so I'm curious why you think that's the case and what that maybe tells you about people's current lens on where we're going. It sort of reminds me a little bit of kind of the earliest days of like the internet and everybody kind of looking around and saying, our business is really secure, not really realizing that in 20 years, none of those companies are going to be around. And, what we can do now will look considerably different. And so I wonder if it's just a timing thing, or the inertia of their existing business models or structures, or how do you sort of think about that? Because ultimately there probably will be some really big losers, and there will probably be a lot of really big winners that look considerably different than the companies today, or don't even exist yet today.
Well, I mean, one of my favorite things is only the paranoid survive. And I think it's really important to be paranoid and to think about it. I think those business leaders or innovators who are thinking deeply about what this means, what the opportunities, and just as importantly, particularly if they're an incumbent in any kind of way, the threats to their business, those who lean in and realize, I believe this is the number one strategic issue facing every single entity in the profession and in the industry. And those who take it as, well, yeah, I know we're doing some things and we had some good people working on it, those people are going to be vulnerable. And so it's those who really lean in and take a strong hand to change their organizations that are going to have a chance to be ahead of the game, or at least with the game. And it's cumulative. It's moving so fast that I feel like I'm like behind. I'm spending an hour a day, which is a lot for me, given all my other health and other requirements, just learning how to use AI. And I feel like I'm behind. And really, everybody's behind because it's moving so fast. So I think at that level of urgency that I'm not sure I see yet within the industry. We've started the conversation.
I think that's such a good point, John. And I imagine in your stewardship of IDEXX for almost 2 decades, you saw many technologies kind of arise and very slowly be adopted and become kind of standard in the industry. And one thing that we've talked about so much here is you can't think about AI in the same way we've thought about other kind of curiosities of technology in the past, because of the rate of change and the level of displacement that it's going to bring. I mean, like you said, 12 to 18 months. That's nuts, right? Like we're saying the conservative estimates, 12 to 18 months, and this completely changes. And I think the reason why this is going to happen so quickly is because it's going to be driven by the consumer lens, probably more than the supply lens. And so, what I'd love to do now is unpack some of the particulars as to how we all see, as far as like, what are we most confident about actually changing within a near-term time frame. And I think the first lesson really is this shifting power balance and evolving dynamic between veterinary practices and the consumer pet owner. So I'm wondering, like, what do you think the key lesson there is? What do people need to really internalize in order to set themselves up to meet this challenge that is not 5-10 years away, but right in front of us right now?
Yeah. Aaron, you have some points of view on that you want to share?
I think it's interesting, right? Because if we go back probably about a decade, there was just a really big growing concern about Dr. Google and people Googling things before they come into the clinic. And now when you look at the amount of power that's in the hands of the consumer today, it far surpasses any of the like kind of various directions and pathways that somebody could follow with Google. They're getting really solid answers. So I've run some workshops with veterinarians where I just give them a relatively ambiguous case and then the prompt, respond as though you were a veterinarian, ask them to put that into ChatGPT and then get a response. And fairly consistently, they're saying, this is a really great answer. That wasn't the case 6 months ago, right? And so very quickly, we're giving access to all of this information into the hands of the consumer. Now, what does that look like down the road? does that then turn the consumer into a partner of the veterinarian? Does that turn the consumer into a driver of the veterinarian? There are additionally cases where a client has come in and said, I've already run this through ChatGPT. I've already got the blood work in there. I've already got everything in there. I just need you to prescribe the following. And the veterinarian has said no. And then the consumer gets really upset because they're like, well, I already have done all this work. And then the veterinarian needs to explain to them, like, there is more information than what can be contained in a prompt to ChatGPT. So that's kind of where we're at right now. Where that might go in the future, where the consumer is taking way more of an empowered stance with respect to the care of their animal, and seeing veterinarians potentially not keep up with that and the access to information that the consumer has, like that is going to create some friction. Whether it's going to be a full-on tipping point where suddenly the consumer has all of the power, like I don't know if we're going to see that. I'm seeing such a positive response from veterinarians using these tools that more and more people are using it. And so I think that there will just be an elevated level of care rather than a tipping point where it goes over to one side rather than another. I think that we'll see more of the partnership model rather than the like power model in the near future. But, that's just a few months of experience with this stuff.
What does that look like in practice, team? Like, what would a partnership model actually look like?
Maybe like a couple data points to help frame this conversation. I think for me, there's kind of two buckets. One is the blind spot that the profession is creating for itself around the client experience. And two is our inability to really meet clients where they want care to be provided and purchased and provisioned. So on the blind spot piece, there's a lot of data that always comes out that shows that people value their veterinarians. The AVMA has come out, and we shared some of this, I believe, in the report. People value their veterinarians. They're extremely satisfied with them. I think in 2022, which is the last data point I saw, like 90% of pet owners were satisfied to extremely satisfied. People want an in-person visit. They've done some of that work before. And so by a lot of metrics, you can make the argument that veterinarians are still kind of a trusted, well-received kind of profession and really serving their clients well. Maybe counter to that, PetDesk's pet owner research report, which we referenced in the report, sort of cites that pet owners 35 years and under are 3 times more likely to change their vet in the next 12 months. And I don't think it's because these are necessarily like bad vets all of a sudden. I think it's because people's expectations have grown really quickly. And now, Aaron, to your point, when they can receive not just like a diagnosis, but I think it's more the explanation, the ongoing communication, the support around these kind of chronic issues. Well, if you contrast that with a veterinary experience where if I send an email, I'm not going to get a response from my vet because they don't have the time, the appointments have gotten shorter, the costs have gone up, maybe the veterinarian that I trust is no longer at that practice, it's not really compatible. And I think it's less of is this the right diagnostic or not, but more the experience around that. And people are in a situation where they are now going to other tools to close that experience gap. Right. And so that is one really important piece, maybe to kind of show how far and how quickly this is moving. This past week, OpenAI announced a partnership with Shopify and Stripe to bring commerce to ChatGPT. And so you can imagine for the first time ever, you're searching and all of a sudden the product that ChatGPT recommends, you can now purchase, right? What happens when that's pet care questions? There's no veterinary service that I'm aware of that is even going to be in a position to serve up. Hey, like you're asking about your pet's care. I'm recommending as ChatGPT, you should go in for care and you should do these diagnostics. Wouldn't it be great if you could just click and purchase that or purchase that plan or purchase that insurance plan or purchase a basket of services that you can then go redeem in other clinics? But there's no clinic on earth right now that's equipped to integrate into those experiences. So on one end, you have this completely new way in which people are discovering products and services with a rich context that's ongoing. But most clinics are completely disintegrated from that. They have no offering to meet people where they are. And so I think that's just one small example that if we are creating an experience that pushes people to take their relationship outside of the clinic because of cost and convenience and personalization, value, all those pieces, what's left is a very commoditized part of the experience because I no longer have a deep relationship with a veterinary professional around my pet's care. I actually have her with these AI assistants, and then I'm just going to go in for the blocking and tackling in those in-person services when I need, but the clinic is going to be largely disconnected from that conversation. So I think that's kind of the two-part thing where we have this blind spot, and at the same time, we're not meeting owners where they increasingly are in the form of these tools.
And I think the reason why they're looking for other channels is because of veterinary service inflation. I mean, the Bureau of Economic Analysis tracks this. While overall CPI cumulatively has increased 26% over the last 4 or 5 years, veterinary service price inflation has increased 45%. This is a much bigger gap than was historically the case. And it's so common now to hear stories. It's just veterinary care is so expensive. They're being pushed to these other channels to find ways to take care of their pet, and they're less loyal now. I mean, that's what the pet desk and some of the other surveys, and they'll have more than one vet. I mean, they may go directly to the specialist, or maybe they have 2 different vets, one that did the low cost spay neuter and one, for the vaccines. This is not atypical, particularly for the Gen Z. So if you've got multiple vets, where's the medical record? It's all over the place.
Jon, sorry, go ahead, Rob. I was going to say, Jon, maybe specifically on that point, one of the things that was really hit hard on the paper was this kind of pricing evolution. And I'm curious how you see, or anybody else, AI addressing this, not addressing this, exasperating those issues, where given that price is becoming, I think, a really significant barrier and almost on this kind of like, I'm not sure where it slows down. What do we think about how these tools?
Well, you were the one who put that little provocations. I don't know what you put it in there. I said, let's put it in there. That little quote about the chatbot for pricing. I had a really well connected innovator who said I could vibe code that app in a weekend. And if I can vibe code that app in a weekend, then it doesn't cost anything to do, and I don't need an ROI on it. It's something I do as maybe part of something else, or I just do it for kicks. I mean, it's we're just predicting what the cost of coding is, particularly for an app has gone down. The ability for agents to collect that kind of market information, it's coming.
I think the key takeaway for me from this discussion is the way that people are interacting with AI is completely changing their expectations for how they're interacting with knowledge work, basically. And I can tell you, like, we see evidence of this. We serve 600 independent veterinary practices, and we track where acquisitions on the website are coming from. And in the last 8 months, traffic from answer engines like ChatGPT has 10x'd. Like, we are seeing a significant logarithmic curve here for pet owners using AI to solve their problems. And I think where it nets out is that this communication expectations evolution needs to be kind of front and center for veterinary practices. And the only way to meet this is by leveraging AI for your practice. You're just not going to have as many hours in the day as you need in order to provide the highly personalized communicative efforts that consumers are now going to be expecting. And I think there are obvious opportunities that we've talked about, here in the show before. And, another thing that I think is a key takeaway for me here is there is the fraying of the relationship between these two parties. And part of it is the inflation of costs that pet owners are seeing. Veterinary care is going up and up and up, and that's pricing out so many out of the market, and I'm sure leaving a lot of bitter feelings. And Jeff Bezos says there are fundamentally 2 different types of companies, one that works to increase cost for their consumer and one that works to decrease cost for their consumer. And I think what we can do is really think about how to improve accessibility by figuring out new models that are enabled by AI. Like there are two kind of types of AI applications. There is efficiency and there's opportunity. Efficiency is just a one-to-one replacement for what people are already doing. Opportunity is net new. It hasn't been done because humans just weren't set up to make this kind of work feasible. And so looking towards the types of innovations that are going to support broader, richer care for people who are currently outside the model is, I think, a super interesting opportunity. So let's talk a little bit in the next key takeaway, I think, is how are independents positioned to meet this challenge and how are corporate groups positioned to meet this challenge. Jon, you have more, like, I'd say, communication and understanding of like how enterprise thinks and works than I could probably ever hope to learn in a lifetime. I'd be really curious to hear kind of what your level of insight there as to how these two kinds of businesses are positioned.
Well, I was listening to an interview by Mark Andreessen Horowitz, and he was saying this is a completely different technology. First, it's being adopted by the individual, and the power of the tools to the individual, these LLMs, is simply enormous. And then the adoption moves to a small business, and you can think of small business as a veterinary practice with a single owner, right? They can move pretty quickly because the owner says, okay, I want to do it. And they just start doing it. Then as the entities and the enterprises get larger, they move more slowly because they get tangled up in their processes and risk management and organizational complexity. And so that's going to be a risk to the corporate groups where they have, the folks who really understand technology at the center, but then they've got to translate it to the last mile, the veterinary practice, as part of their network. On the other hand, they are able to devote resources towards, looking at all these innovations. There was just a conference last week where the innovators and the corporate players were getting together. And some of these innovators are saying, I'm just going to work with a corporate because it's a lot easier to work with a corporate than it is to try to, win each individual practice individually. And it's always been hard to get the individual practices in this industry. So there are different challenges. There are different resources. I think it's going to be, and not every practice is the same. We talked about that in the paper, the great diversity of practice and practice innovation, and not every corporate is the same. Someone once told me, who was dealing with corporates day in and day out, one corporate and one corporate. You can't generalize. So it'll be interesting to see how these two groups, think of them as 60-40, 55-35, these two groups within the U.S. market, let alone markets outside the U.S., are taking advantage of the huge transformation being driven by the peddling.
I think one of the super interesting things about this is just again, like back to the speed of adoption, right? Corporations have obviously larger, deeper pockets than an individual practice does, but the speed at which an individual practice is able to adopt some of these technologies currently appears to outstrip the corporate ability to adopt. For example, with scribing, somebody could, within 15 minutes, go from knowing a particular tool that they want to use to signing up to running through their first case. And they could do that within 15 minutes. Now, a corporate group could potentially move that fast, but typically the way that it goes is there's an RFP that goes out, then somebody bids on that, there's a long piloting process, and then as a result of that, you have adoption. And that's anywhere from 3 to 6 months down the road if it's on an accelerated timeline. But for the individual practice, like that is their superpower, is their ability to grab onto something really quickly, iterate on it, make changes, try something new, and then be able to roll it out to the entire practice. And so this democratization that's happened through something like ChatGPT, where it's giving people access to it, is giving those independent practices a far greater advantage than what the larger corporations will have. It doesn't mean that the corporations can't do it. It just means that historically the independents have had this advantage, and we are seeing it today with AI.
I think the other thing too is you look at the way that these entities are sort of structured, right? So like an independent practice, it's told time and time again, you don't have an accountant, you're not a marketing person, or you don't have these people who are going to be, human resources that you need to bring that function or that capability to your business. And so they just struggled in some of those cases when in the previous, paradigm, you needed a human who understood these tools, and they would work together to build your marketing campaign or build your website or organize your operations. And so, but now independent practices can just use AI to kind of fill those functions, and they can move incredibly quickly, and it gives them superpowers that traditionally have been humans. And so on one end, that gives you incredible power as an independent practice. But the thing that you actually had along the way was this kind of trust of your clients and the ability in many cases to, recruit and motivate your staff. And so those are incredibly important kind of ingredients for this recipe of the future. On the flip side, these corporate groups now have much more rigid structures of many layers of management. And you're sort of thinking, well, wait a second, if I'm reading about how AI is going to transform all these roles, am I thinking of, adding these capabilities to those roles? Should those roles exist? Are those people going to be motivated to adopt those tools? Or are they going to be threatened because now, my job used to be like reading spreadsheets and talking to practices, and now maybe AI is better at a component of that job. And so are the incentives set up for those teams to actually want to properly incorporate and adopt these tools? And I think that there's going to be quite a level of kind of opaqueness, where on one end you have the entire team using ChatGPT off the side of their desk and frankly not wanting to tell their employers because they want to be looking like they're great workers, while at the same time maybe not actively and softly incorporating some of these new capabilities kind of from the top down because they're worried about perhaps their job security. And so I think these have this crystallized structure that was seen as an advantage that corporate groups could provide could become a really significant disadvantage when you look at the speed and capabilities that are being brought to market. So I think that's really interesting. On the flip side, for the longest time, corporate groups have been trying to figure out a way to bring more structured approaches to standards of care in a way that somehow aligns with that of the veterinary team, while at the same time growing their business. And I think one of the things that these groups have struggled with is that we've known for a very long time. You forward book appointments, you talk about insurance, you enroll in online stores, you promote wellness plans. There's a bunch of tactics that are well documented that if practices do, they see success. But the problem has been the delivery of the messages and the training have largely fallen on deaf ears. A lot of practices still don't send estimates to every client. They don't present financial options. And the only real tactic and lever they had was more webinars, more in-person training, more lunches. And I think what's going to happen is these groups might say, well, wait a second, maybe the solution is just to hire an AI receptionist that always talks about cost and always sends out an estimate and always promotes insurance and always talks about our wellness plans, because we tried getting your team to do that and we were rejected. And now we want an AI that's going to do that. And I think it's going to be really interesting where they sort of say, you know what, we're just going to try to get to that outcome, and what that ends up doing for the trust and relationships that they have kind of at the field level. So I can see it being a really powerful way for corporates to maybe cut through some of the human barriers to arriving at those goals. But I can also imagine it backfiring where this becomes a model of care that seems sterile, that seems like it's not benefiting that of the veterinary team, where, vets are now having to compete against AI and unwind recommendations. And I think in that case, all the talent might flow to independent practices. So I think for me, I'm still curious to see where we'll all shake out.
I think it's a really interesting point that groups might sort of back into a working model here. I like to say things that are provocative and likely to get me into trouble. So I'd like to go in a level deeper here, because I think it's a deeper problem. AI uses this term called a reward function. It's basically kind of what are we always testing against? How do we know if we're getting closer or further away from our goal? Like, what is that goal? And I think a lot of these boardrooms, and, I want to tie this back to independence too, is ultimately my takeaway is I think independents are going to win here and win big. I think if a lot of these boardrooms were honest, and probably are, there are a lot of smart people there probably having these discussions, their reward function is not to be customer obsessed. It's to get as high of a valuation multiple on this, organization as we can, so that we can increase equity holder value as much as possible. And I think my main lesson from Steve Jobs, who is sort of like a business hero to me, and I think he was incredibly astute not only about building products but building an organization, is basically you need to be customer obsessed and think from the end user and build everything out in support of what that end user actually wants and needs. I just don't know if that's what a lot of corporate groups are interested in doing. Is that really what you're trying to do here, is understand the customer and build an ecosystem around them that makes sense given what they're telling you they need? How many times have you asked them what they need? How well do you understand the emotional side of the journey, like how this needs to evolve? I have a bakery that's maybe like a half mile down the road from our house. That best time of my day is at about 6:45 in the morning. Forrest, my son, and I will start our walk. He's in a stroller. I'm pushing him. I listen to podcasts. I'm usually listening to like the AI Daily Brief, and then maybe Lenny's podcast or Unsupervised Learning, some great AI driven ones. And I go to this bakery because it is a guy, very heavy French accent, that owns it. His father operated a bakery in, the outskirts of Paris. His grandfather did the same thing, and he's brought it here. And his reward function isn't to, at least I don't think, isn't to grow the business KPIs that make this as valuable as possible for a potential acquirer or an IPO. His reward function is, to him, this is like art. And he is obsessed about his art in delivering something that he truly feels proud of. That's what I've learned from so many independent practitioners here. There's like a passion and attention to detail that is just so hard for the groups to replicate, because you have somebody on the ground who feels real ownership and agency, and they can make these fast decisions based on what they're seeing, and they care so deeply about their art, about their trade. And so I think that this could be very dangerous for groups, because independents are positioned to move so quickly here. To Aaron, to your point, like, what do you need as an independent to adopt a completely new customer-centric workflow with AI at the center? Not even an afternoon, like 15 minutes, right? And you could have this incredible new vision of delivering care. And so, I guess like the thing that I'd say that will get me into trouble is, I'd ask these larger organizations to be honest about what you actually care about. And I think for any organization, independents or groups, my very humble lesson would be get customer obsessed. Figure out what customers want, and as quickly as you can build a structure that is deeply supportive of the logistics and emotions behind that. So Jon, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I was just going to say, the counter to that is, it's possible that corporates, they're made up of a lot of caring veterinarians too, that just happen to be as part of a corporate group. But it could be the corporates succeed despite themselves. I was listening to the guys who developed the Sophie app just yesterday, that you could just buy this thing. Okay, $20 a user, right? 5 users for 100 and a month. It's not that expensive. You just start using it completely independent of the rest of the workflow. So you could have vets who are part of a corporate, but they're saying, hey, I really want to be, supercharged, and I'm just going to start using this as part of my practice. It doesn't have to be, it'd be better if it was integrated, but it doesn't have to be integrated. I mean, you could see that really, that the vets within the corporates who care, and there are many, many of them, just start adopting things outside of the sanctioned corporate And, I guess if I was running corporate, I'd like to see 1,000 flowers bloom. So it's the classic issue in an enterprise is, are controls loose or are they tight? And where they came out as simultaneous loose tight. And there's a lot of innovation that can happen, at the veterinary level in these corporates that could benefit the corporates in the same way it benefits the independent practices.
That's such a thoughtful point. And I appreciate you kind of reining back the very broad brush I was using, because there are very different types of groups and some that are doing very interested things around like distributed leadership. Aaron, Adam, I would be really curious to hear your thoughts on that.
So one of the things that we're starting to see already is like consolidation of those kinds of resources, right? For example, COVID is currently integrating Sophie into its decision-making for veterinarians. And so instead of having these like 40 different programs and having to link through all of them, we're seeing all of this consolidation happening. And just, I would love for us to spend even just a moment talking through like what systems of action mean. But before we get there, I think you probably have a point that you want to bring in.
No, just like I think that customer obsession at the end of the day, you also have to remember that they're trying to figure out how to obsess with veterinarians. And sometimes those goals are in conflict with another, right? So you can be a corporate group that launches a new rebate program or discount program to help make that first year pet ownership more affordable, but veterinarians and the team might feel like you're devaluing their services, right? Like I think people forget how challenging that can be. And I think and this is a good maybe segue to the technology side, this level of control I think is much bigger than people realize, because scribing sort of broke the fundamental software model in the veterinary space. And the model used to look like this. If you wanted a piece of software as a clinic, especially as we started to see consolidation, it would be kind of a top-down implementation. It would require integration and approvals with your hospital management system. It would require weeks to get started, if not months. And it was a long, arduous cycle with the PIMS at the center of this. There really wasn't a lot of veterinary specific tools that the average front desk person or the average veterinarian could kind of pick up and start using in their workflow with their own, by themselves, right? With no approvals, just getting started. And this is what's happening now. And I think that control balance versus maybe that kind of autonomy becomes really, really fascinating, because it is a completely different, almost like view of the universe, right? Whereas opposed to having the PIMS at the center of it, where everything sits around it. And remember, to maybe show another example of this, there's been a lot of really good ideas in veterinary medicine that weren't possible to realize because of that model. So if you had a capability, but it was going to take 6 months to integrate, or you couldn't monetize it sufficiently because the integration cost alone would be 30 or 40% of your revenue, like that idea can't be realized. Like it just goes nowhere. And so it's not just that the model's changing in a way that maybe the corporate groups might have less control from a top-down perspective of the technology that their teams are using, but with it is a flood of new ideas, of new technologies that can be integrated more easily and more cost effectively into really like point of care systems where they have a direct relationship with the end user. So it's no longer like I'm going to sell to this like VP or middle manager who's then going to try to get the team on board, but it turns out the actual user of my technology is like the front desk person. These companies are developing deep personalized relationships with the end user that is now beginning to shift the care experience at the practice level. And with that, I think we're opening up a completely new way of working that's bringing real value and solving real problems. But there's a part of it that I think is very threatening and uncomfortable to people that are starting to realize like we're not even controlling those workflows anymore. And if you're a corporate group, just to really put a fine point on it, for the first time ever with these dictation tools, you actually have eyes and ears in the exam room. you can know what your veterinarians are saying. And so on one side, you can imagine, isn't this a great, powerful learning tool in order to understand what are the barriers to arriving at the patient care that we want to advocate for? Couldn't it be a great kind of peer-to-peer training tool? We now have the complementary data set, aside from just like the invoice data. But the other side of the equation is a bunch of veterinarians saying, I don't want my bosses eavesdropping on me. That's my sacred space. I don't want them like looking at the data. I don't want them using it against me to change my production levels or say that I'm not speaking about X, Y, and Z product confidently enough. And so it really gets back to the trust and the culture at these practices, because if you have a team that's leaning into those capabilities, and I think independent practice is in a better position to maybe use the full suite of those capabilities with their team, that is a radically different pathway forward than a team that is saying, I'm going to use these tools myself. I don't want you to have access to them. In fact, I'm willing to pay for it myself to keep it separated, which we are seeing. And I think that might be where some of these corporate groups end up, and they're not taking full advantage of some of these new data streams because they haven't earned the trust and built the culture at the practice level.
The historical model was that the PIMS was the medical system of record. And why? Because the pet owner went to one veterinarian. The veterinarian had all the information, whether it was the physical exam findings, the history that was shared by the pet owner, all the diagnostic, all the therapeutics, it was all in there, and there was a system of record. That whole paradigm is fragmenting and disintegrating before our very eyes. Why? Because now there's a lot that the pet owner knows about their pet that they're sharing independently with their ChatGPT or whatever. The pet owner is going to multiple vets. In fact, pet owners will go directly to specialty referral. A fairly significant percentage of specialty referral is pet owners going direct, and so there is no unified system of record. It just doesn't exist anymore, and that's completely fragmenting one of the control points and making the PIMS more of an adjunct than it is a control point in the equation. And I think you can make the same argument about pet owner communication systems of records. Again, it was originally everything needs to be put in the PIMS so we have a full record of everything. Well, that's just moving so quickly into a different and fragmented that it's changing the concept of veterinary software.
How do you see that playing out? I mean, you have such an interesting point of view and experience within this. Like, what do you see the landscape shaping itself to be?
Well, I will tell you, I've had, and you told me this would happen. We publish this paper, and all of a sudden, people come out of the woodwork and want to talk to you. And my rule with talking with everybody is, please share, but anything you tell me that, you're telling me in confidence, I'm not gonna share. I'll just share the broad trends of what I'm hearing. But what I am hearing is there are probably at least 3 or 4, I would guess more, highly competent people who are developing an AI native system. I don't call it PIMS because I don't think it's the PIMS anymore. That would work in collaboration with a PIMS, but slowly replace the PIMS. This idea, and I think, Adam, you were the first one that said it, this idea of, well, I got to go through a PIMS conversion, and I got to rip out, I got to put in, everybody's going to be really unhappy because their workflows have been disrupted, and it's a very painful experience. That may be a thing of the past as these new softwares come in. You don't even realize your PIMS is changing. Exactly. And so that could be the direction it goes with. There's just a tremendous amount of innovation. I don't know, something about the pet industry. It just attracts innovation. There's a lot of very smart people who are 2 people in a garage who are developing really. I mean, we highlighted Sophie, we highlighted Pointer, totally different approach, but there's just so many of them that are out there. Some of them not ready really to go public. They're working on, on their thing before they're going to, and not all of them are going to survive. We know that. It's so hard. Great software doesn't necessarily make great business, but the amount of innovation that's taking place is just Very exciting.
I think it's really important to kind of frame this because I think people sometimes misinterpret and misunderstand the point that we're trying to make here, which is if I'm a PIMS company today, I can point to a lot of data that suggests that my business is fine. Practices, the hardest thing for them to do, technology wise, is to rip and replace a PIMS. Once they choose a PIMS, they tend to stay on it. And corporate groups right now are looking to consolidate their PIMS platform. And so if you've built a business in that paradigm, you might be feeling very comfortable. And the most that practices tend to pay for technology, that gets eaten by the PIMS. So we're also kind of the largest, line item in that budget. We're not saying that overnight everybody switches to PIMS. We're saying that the PIMS are made irrelevant because what ends up happening is the work
Time.
begins to accrue to these other tools, right? And so you take something like medical record generation as just the first example. This was a workflow that was 100% in the PIMS, and now it is outside the PIMS. And not only is it outside of the PIMS, but you're not just replicating that workflow, you are doing things like, to Aaron's point, integrating decision support, starting to handle intake, doing the downstream follow-up of the task. It is a completely different flow. And so what might happen is the vast majority, the 80-20 rule, 80% of the key workflows are now happening outside of your PIMS. The values are accruing to that layer. They are monetizing it in different ways than you ever could. And yes, they kept your system of record, but it's far less important. And at the end of the day, decays as really being the central hub of the practice. All the while, people are saying that they don't want to switch to the PIPs. So that's really hard for people to wrap their head around because you can convince yourself based on previous data and current findings in the field that your position is fine. But the 10x gains that are going to be realized by these new companies that, by the way, are not going to eat into the software budgets. They're going to eat into the human resource budgets of these companies, of these practices. They're not going to sell receptionists a piece of software for, $100 a month. They're going to give you a virtual receptionist that you're paying on outcomes that's going to make $1,000 a month. And I think people really fail to appreciate how clunky and broken the experience is. And maybe two kind of final things just to visualize. The first is, do we really believe that the future is a bunch of people working around pets and then going back to a really small, tight office to type on a computer? No, clearly that's not the future, right? You might disagree when and how, but that's not the future. The second part is we're already seeing this in human health because who knows more information about my health than my doctor? Apple. Right? You want a snapshot of my health? Not only does it have my medical records, but it has my activity, my sleep, the medications that you're on. We already see that these tech companies are able to consolidate your entire health picture. And there was once a study that Merck did that showed that most people spend like 0.001% of their year in the veterinarian's office. So this system of record is basically like a post-it note in the library of your pet's health, your relationship to them. And if we think that's going to be like the advantage that these companies have, I think that they're kidding themselves, especially when that data, by the way, is owned by the pet owner and they can get it at any time.
The big takeaways for me are like, if you haven't done anything yet, do it now, like right now. And whether that's an individual practice, like trying out some of these new tools, and most of them don't need any convincing. You're saying, look, you don't have to write medical records anymore. And they immediately jump on top of that. For the large organizations, either you already are looking at this stuff and you're implementing it and then you're iterating on it. This is not we have to figure out our 6 to 12 month strategy on this stuff in order to then be able to, no, like you need to be doing this stuff right now. You need to be working with some of these companies who already have these tools in place. And worst case scenario, you set up a task force, like again, right now, and make this stuff happen for the organization. It's really hard because it's not that there is this monumental wave. It's just you're going to continually lose market share if you're not doing something right now because people are. And if you are not, you're already behind. Those are my big takeaways.
I don't think anybody should feel confident about their position, like anybody, because what AI does is I almost think of it as moving like the defensibility of your business from like a 2-dimensional map to a 3-dimensional one. Like all of a sudden, there are just so many ways for you to be disrupted, me included. Like I don't feel confident about our position. I feel like we have a sound strategy, but I don't think anybody deserves to feel confident here. I I wonder if and Adam, you had sent this email that just blew my mind when I think it was like a couple days ago, really early in the morning, as I was on a walk with Forrest to that French bakery, and it was talking about how if we think from first principles here, what we need isn't so much these like the system that the PIMS is. We need a very specific set of tasks to be done properly, and there's no real reason for us to require that is kind of like this antiquated modus operandi. Like, this can be hyper specialized technologies that carry through these functions for practice. And like my bet would be, if we look at the organizations that are going to win here, I think it's going to be the ones whose CEOs are like the biggest users and drivers of AI in the company. Like, fundamentally, I think that's what's required of a CEO now. Like, it's on you. It is on you to be the company's power user of AI. Like, nobody should be using AI more than you. You should be aggressively thinking about what the ramifications are, second, third order effects. And I mean, honestly, like, that's if you're not, like, if you're kind of delegating an AI czar here, or leaving it to the typical operations of, okay, let's evaluate 6-12 months, we'll pick a partner, you're gonna lose, and you're gonna lose big. I think that is almost a certainty. So let's get to our key takeaways as to what we want, like, to leave the audience with. How do we distill this into the actionable so what of how do we bring this to the ground and build the industry that helps us all thrive and flourish and meet our customers and patients where they are?
First of all, I think at the end, it's going to be the pet owner and the pet that wins. I think there is a lot of pent-up demand that's building for care. How that's delivered will be a good question. Whether new veterinary models and AI native veterinary practice that's totally different, or the established can win, that'll be interesting. But I do believe that all this innovation and the various rates of adoption will be the beneficiaries will be our customer. Second is, everybody's saying here, you have to be uber customer focused. This has not been the characteristic of the veterinary industry, because they haven't had to, because pet owners were, up until 2022, they were loyal. So they just came in, business was real great, and then all of a sudden visits started to climb. The third thing is, and I totally agree, every single person needs to be adopting a set of AI tools one step at a time in their life and in their professional role. They just have to dedicate time to, and I'm like, I got a stack of like 5 things I want to learn this weekend. I'm not going to learn all 5, okay, but I'm going to learn at least 1 or 2 of them, and add it to the half dozen I've already put into my personal productivity tool. Everyone needs to, because when you do that, you begin to understand the power, and that's let alone before we ever get to the power of agent technology, which you can use personally. And so really, the one of the things I heard is the risk of overinvesting is far less than the risk of underinvesting. The risk of overinvesting is you wasted something. You did something and it didn't really work out. The risk of underinvesting is you fall further and further behind because somebody else is overinvesting. It's a cumulative experience kind of thing. So treat it as an existential risk. Whether you're an individual practice, a corporate entity, a supplier, an association, it's really got to be your number one strategic issue on your agenda.
Yeah, really well said. I think for me, there's a couple. One is, and this was kind of the spirit of the paper as well, I think we have a very optimistic view of what this means for both pet owners and veterinarians. I think at the end of the day, this could be like a golden age for veterinary medicine, because for I think all the reasons that we are likely to be susceptible to further disruption could actually create the conditions where we can see some of the biggest gains. And when you think about like a lot of how veterinarians spend their time today, it's not doing the parts of their job that they love, that they're uniquely qualified for. And the problem has been, even when veterinarians sought out solutions to those problems, they were expensive, they were inaccessible, they couldn't solve them themselves. And they were told repeatedly by the market that the only way that you can kind of do the things you love is to sell your practice and get this entire organizational model that's going to take over the operations and the financing and the marketing and all these pieces. But now veterinarians are able to speak that into existence, like literally. And not only that, they can create it for themselves using some of these new tools and automations. And so you look at like, what would an incredibly well-respected community leader it's serving pets in their local area that now has 1,000 digital workers that can do everything else to make that practice successful. I bet you that veterinarian is going to be very successful. I think they're going to be very happy. I think they're going to be incredibly productive. And so if you can kind of find what are the parts of the job that are less likely to be changed, to double down on those, and at the same time be self-aware and constructive enough to be willing to hand off these other parts, not necessarily to humans that you need to, partner with, hire, outsources to, but with now digital pieces of functionality and infrastructure, I think that is incredibly, incredibly exciting. So that's one piece. Related to that is I think that we are going to see an absolute explosion in medical research and ultimately the quality of care. We've already seen how pets are living longer, that people are spending more money, they want more. The advancement of veterinary care is going to make a lot of things that we do today look like the modern day equivalent of bloodletting. There's a lot of the entire profession, not very long ago, was doing things today that we would shake our heads at and be like, that is barbaric. And I think that we need to be, realistic that there are things that we are doing today, whether that's like generic approaches to medicine as opposed to using like genomics to personalized care, the things that the approaches to surgery, like perhaps eventually it's more implants, and the idea of like cutting open a pet to do a spay or neuter, it seems barbaric. I'm not sure, but there's going to be a rocket ship here, and our ability to unlock the collective wisdom of the profession is really, really powerful, not just today, but the historical data as well that we're going to be able to find insights in. And the third is, and this is more from like a well-being perspective, I think veterinary medicine can be very isolating. I think it can be very lonely. I think it can be very difficult when things go wrong. It's the reason like groups like Not One More Vet are so active, because people are constantly seeking out support. And I'm not saying that we all get AI companions, but I think if we can figure out a way so that technology can provide us with that safety net, both in terms of clinical decision making, but also just support, and then connect and weave that into our relationships with humans, that is incredibly powerful for a lot of people that probably feel like they practice alone and don't get that support. And so you can imagine how much more confident would you feel if outside the exam room door, there was a board certified team of specialists that was always available, that were your number one cheerleaders, that were free to use, that never slept, that understood all your cases. What would it feel like to practice in that environment? That would be pretty cool. And we are on the cusp of every veterinarian getting to practice like that. It's absolutely amazing. And so if nothing else, I hope that people from the paper take away that there is this optimistic, constructive, amazing potential direction for the profession that is going to unlock the true potential of some of the most caring and committed people that exist on this planet, for a market that has never been bigger, that has never spent more money.
That's such a great point, Adam. And I think, we have been speaking through this last hour from the perspective of like, what are the threats? Because we are so incredibly optimistic about what's going to happen here. And this is where the work is, right? Like, this is where the work exists to get us to that point where we have the type of ecosystem that I think is incredibly inspiring, where the total addressable market of our profession isn't tens of millions of pets, it's billions. And that to me is like, I would love to make any level of contribution for us getting to that would be a way I could feel comfortable leaving this earth and justifying my existence. To me, the key takeaway is the need to adopt Silicon Valley style thinking to our profession. Jon, to your point, like that means complete customer obsession. And I think there are two levels that this can operate from. One is more like systemic, and the way I think you do that is you work to understand almost like the broader attitudes and needs and preferences of your customer. I mean, you can build out a survey, right? That, spend some time with ChatGPT saying like, this is what I want this survey to accomplish, and work with it and understand not only how they see your practice and how they want care delivered, but the specific touch points in the journey, every single step, how they perceive that, whether or not they feel that sets them up for strength and alignment, or if they feel something's kind of inconvenient or broken. I think there are some just like low effort wins that you can utilize AI to come up with. Tell it it's a behavior scientist who's an expert at developing surveys and saying like, I need to get customer obsessed. I need to understand how my client base really sees my practice, where we're missing, where our strengths are. Help me ask the questions that really get my head around what people now expect of veterinary medicine. And, I think one thing that is blocking us from finding alignment with our customers is the incentives aren't right. So like, I think, again, this is going to get me into trouble. I think production pay is problematic because it's not aligned with what the consumer needs. Just like I think anybody can be honest and say like that sets us up for problems. I mean, hell, what do you think a pet owner would say if they knew that their veterinarian was compensated based on how much they spend during the visit? Do you think that's going to create warm, fuzzy feelings of trust with pet owners? No. But I think the thing that would be interesting for us to compensate on is how well our customers feel we're identifying and solving their problems and working as a real team there. Like, I think if we brought a different lens that is much more customer obsessed and paid people based on how aligned we are to what customers actually need. It's that Silicon Valley, or the Steve Jobs vision of like, give a shit about optimizing for top and bottom lines. What I care about is how well are we solving the problems of our customer. The money always follows. Like if you solve that's what any business does, is solve a problem for a customer. If you do that really well, you're going to be profitable and you'll get all the things you want. And so another quick and easy thing I think you can do, we talked about this before, like price transparency is coming. Millennials and Gen Zers expect it of pretty much every business they interact with. I can easily get an idea of fees for almost any business that I see, and veterinary medicine is one of very few exceptions. And there's just like, that's going to change. There's going to be somebody's going to vibe code this app in a weekend and have, somebody robocall in a very convincing way and figure out what your exam fees are and blood work. And that's just like, that's going to happen. I'm not going to do it, but somebody's going to build it. And so the way you can get ahead of this and build trust is like, put some transparency of fees on your website. And it shouldn't just be like that race to the bottom view. You should justify and do a little storytelling around like why your pricing is the way it is. But empowering consumers to better understand the landscape is really where our focus should be. And then the second, just before we wrap up here, because this is getting fairly long-winded for me, is below systemically thinking through how do we become customer obsessed with the visit itself. And so I think honestly asking yourself, how often am I getting the full picture when somebody walks through those doors ahead of time? Do I really know what they're worried about? Like from a deeper level, like, do I know what they want? Do I know what their reward function is? And whether or not they, really want to talk about finances, or like how stressed out they get coming to the vet. Like, how well do I understand my customer? This is the whole idea of Spotlight, is like there's all this context that is actually really important in building this bond and experience in the practice. And so my takeaway would be the companies who are not just paying lip service to customer obsession, but doing the work of understanding them and then adopting these tools that can be tremendous unlocks, both in efficiency and opportunity. games, I think are going to be the ones that win. And I think both types of organizations, independents and groups, can do it. They have different strengths and advantages, but I think if we do it, ultimately we're going to have a pretty tremendous future for this industry. So thank you, everyone. Thanks to
Robert.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jon.
John, my goodness, like, it's such an honor to have you here. I can't tell you what it means to me. I know to Adam and Aaron, just a huge admirer, and it means so much that you are here doing this work, and man, I respect the hell out of you.
Well, here I am in this podcast learning things, so that's just the nature of it.
Thank you. All right. We will see you all in a couple weeks, and lots of exciting stuff to work on.